Hello, I'm a woman in my 30s who has been living alone in Canada since I lost my beloved husband after a long battle with illness. Sometimes, because I miss Korea, I listen to other people's life stories on a channel, which I could empathize with. So, I decided to share my story also. In 1998, Korea was in chaos due to the IMF crisis, when the country went nearly bankrupt. My father, who used to run auto parts manufacturing factory, also suffered the aftermath. His factory was always full of creditors, and red labels were all over our house by the bank and the government due to late payments. My life in an affluent family was disrupted eventually, as my father's company went bankrupt. Overnight, our family of 4 ended up in a one-room studio, and with no hope, my father was forced to leave Korea to find a new life in Canada. Only as a 5th grader in an elementary school, I had no decision-making power because I was too young and our circumstances were so dire. So, we left Korea and settled in Toronto. However, our lives in Toronto were not that different from Korea. My parents, who couldn't speak English at all, could only find jobs as janitors or menial works in restaurants owned by Koreans. We were warned to be careful of other Koreans abroad. Even though I was young, I saw too many awful situations that reminded me of those warnings. Those people would not pay accurately for the work and were often verbally abusive. Despite suffering such humiliation, my parents worked really hard to raise me and my younger brother. However, the first year in Canada was a pure nightmare for me. As an Asian girl who could not speak any English due to sudden immigration, I was teased by others, and for having small eyes and yellow skin, I was a victim of racial discrimination. At school, the students called me Yellow Monkey, and some even spat at me. The more they treated me with racial discrimination, the more I studied hard. Even when I achieved high grades, the teasing changed to sneering that I was snobbish. But one by one, I started to gain friends. Eventually, I was accepted into their community. 7 years after the immigration, my parents were able to open up a small food store with the money they saved up. At first, the store was empty with no customers, so we had to worry about closing the store. However, did someone say that with life you never know? My mom, who grew up in Jeollanam-do, famous for its tasty food, was an excellent cook, and she started to make Korean side dishes to sell in the store, which became a big hit. Our standard of life began to improve. The memories of living in Korea became vague, as my college graduation was just ahead, and I was able to do a coveted internship at a global company. There, I met the love of my life. Because I could speak Korean, I was assigned as a guide and an interpreter for a manager transferred from Korea. I was excited to be free from the boring, repetitive office tasks. It was my first time to be given important responsibilities. Thus, I was nervous and curious about to what kind of person I was assigned. I held a picket at the arrival section of the airport, waiting for the new manager. "Excuse me? Are you from the L Corporation?" I thought that the new manager would be an older person. my name is Minx, a transferee from Korea. When I first saw him, I was so surprised. I did not expect him to be so young, just around my age. He also seemed anxious and bowed 90 degrees to me, who was a mere intern. He seemed so innocent and almost cute. However, unlike his innocent look, his background was incredible. He had graduated from Seoul National University, the top college in Korea, and at only 28, he was transferred to Canada as a manager. I was no match to him, but he was humble and very polite to work with. Our company gave him 2 weeks off to adjust to Canada, and as I was assigned to be his guide, I also had 2 weeks off to help him get to know Canada. I was in charge of getting him open a bank account and setting him up to settle in a new place. But since he only started hard all his life, he really didn't know how to carry out daily and common tasks. Raising a child would be like this, I thought. He was so curious about every detail and asked questions about everything without resting, which was somewhat tiring. However, it was fun and interesting, since I was able to have a conversation with someone other than my family members. Oh, I'm too talkative, aren't I? We had just met yesterday, but Stella, I feel at home with you. He said that he was talkative because he felt comfortable with me, but to me, he just seemed to be a talkative person. Because he contacted me so much via text messages and on the phone, with never-ending talking, we became very close in a short period. When the 2 weeks were over, he became very busy preparing for his office work and asked me a favor. Stella, I want to go see the Niagara Falls. It's my bucket list to see the 3 of the world's largest waterfalls. I went to see the Iguazu Falls in Brazil 2 years ago, and it was great. In retrospect, we had so many things to set up that we had hardly visited any nearby tourist attractions. So, we immediately set out for the Niagara Falls. During the 2 hours drive, he of course did a long monologue about the world's greatest waterfalls. I thought then it won't be boring to be with someone like him. After the 2 weeks, when I met him at the office, he was different. I thought of him to be light since he chatted away non-stop, but at work he was very detail-oriented as a great leader. While working with him, I thought that I had a lot to learn from him. However, as soon as work was over, he would return to the innocent and talkative young man in his 20s. I didn't know to which drum I should march. I finished my internship after 6 months of working. On my last day of work, he handed over a small necklace with a handwritten letter and said, Stella, can I continue to contact you? In Canada, you're my only friend. In truth, the previous 3 months with him was a new experience for me, and I got used to his chatter. So, I was worried about ending it just like that. But since he asked me first whether he can continue to contact me, I was more grateful to him. After that, whenever we had time, we met and continued our talks. Sometimes he would even come to our house to eat. My parents would treat him like a son-in-law whenever he came over, and I was embarrassed many times. Even though he came over to our house, or we met every weekend to spend time talking, it was difficult to describe exactly what kind of relationship we were having. One day, As this unclear relationship continued, an incident occurred to clarify what we were to each other. It was the day of my college graduation, but I didn't have a partner, so I just stayed home to help my mom. Then I got a call from him. "Stella, come outside." My mother smiled at me at his sudden visit without any notice. I wore no makeup and just pulled my cap over my eyes and went out. Then, there stood a man with a tuxedo next to a sports car that one might only see on TV, right in front of our house. On top of that, he even brought a dress that I could wear. Later, I learned that my mother was sad to see me without a partner to go to the college graduation party, so she contacted Minx. Whatever the situation, thanks to her, I was able to finish the graduation party successfully. I felt genuinely grateful to him. On the other hand, I felt sorry to have taken up his time because of me. "Minx, I'm sorry. You must be so busy at work, but because of me." He just looked at me with a puzzled expression. Then, he said something I totally did not expect. "You shouldn't apologize to me for that. Why didn't you invite me for this occasion? I have been waiting so much." At his sudden confession of his affection for me, it bewildered me at that time. In retrospect, I believe I was waiting for his confession also. From that day on, we became a couple, and after dating for a year, we became a married couple. I learned after we got engaged that my husband had similar wounds as I had. His family also suffered due to the IMF crisis when his father became unemployed, and his mother had abandoned his father and him. Since then, he has never saw his mother again. My husband was trying to hide his pain and all the more tried to be cheerful. After learning about his pain, even his chattiness brought heartache. Our wedding was small, with just my father-in-law and a few relatives invited to Canada, but with blessings. Our newlywed life started like that. Although many say that men change after getting married, my husband didn't, remaining innocent and chatty as ever. I spent happy days, but as life does not remain the same as we intend, we had to return to Korea as my husband's transfer ended in Canada. I felt helpless since I had been away from Korea for more than 16 years, except for a brief visit to Korea for my wedding. I didn't know how I could live in Korea without my family or any friends. But because I had my husband, who was always on my side, I was able to start a new life in Korea. It took a while to adjust to Korea, which had greatly changed, but it wasn't as hard as when we first immigrated to Canada. As my husband returned to the headquarters, he was promoted and became much busier. 6 months passed so fast, and one day, as I was trying to do the laundry, I noticed bloodstains on my husband's dress shirt. When I asked my husband about it, he said it was nothing but a nosebleed. I had been worried because he seemed much more tired and had a bad complexion from fatigue. At that time, I just thought he was tired and made some energizing food and did not think seriously about it. However, realizing that my husband was not well didn't take too long. The small blood stain on his shirts became bigger to the amount of soaking them, leading to his collapsing in bed as soon as he returned home from work, unlike his usual chatting for at least 1 hour before he went to sleep. When he couldn't get up easily in the morning, I felt a dangerous signal. A week later, we heard the news that totally shook our lives. It's the 3rd stage of liver cancer. You must proceed immediately for a treatment. I thought the sky had fallen. I was so shocked that no tears even came out. He never smoked nor drank in his whole life, but to get the liver cancer? My husband, who was always so positive, even was speechless at the cancer diagnosis. I couldn't say anything to my husband to comfort him. As we came out of the hospital, my husband held my hands tightly and said, "I'm sorry, honey." I burst into tears at my husband, who kept apologizing to me when it is he who needs comforting for being ill. After crying for some time, all of a sudden, I gathered myself up. As the doctor advised that it would increase his chances of cure if he started his treatment as soon as possible, my husband took the sick leave and began his treatment. Although he went to the hospital and home for 6 months of treatment, there was no improvement. His doctor said now the only option was to receive a liver transplant and suggested testing. I wanted to immediately give him my liver, but after testing, both his father and I were not compatible donors. We could only wait for the donor without knowing when that will occur. I couldn't just stand by watching my husband's health deteriorate. So, I decided to look for my husband's mother who had abandoned my husband when he was young. I wanted to ask for her help for the liver transplant. Perhaps, are you Misu Kim? I'm the wife of Minx. I came to see you as I have something to tell you. What is it? Minx is very sick right now. Only a liver transplant is left. As his mother, is it possible for you to take the test? Lady, we have cut our ties for more than 20 years. You suddenly show up asking for my liver, and I'm very annoyed. I don't wish to meet him again or give him my liver, so don't come here again. Honestly, I was shocked. Even though she left her son to find a life for herself, her own son was sick. She did not even worry nor wish to see him at all. I knelt and begged her in tears. Please, I'm begging you. If you do not help, Minx will die. Please. Despite my desperate pleas, she did not turn around and went into her house. Although my husband did not express it, I could tell he was somewhat relying on his mother, and I couldn't tell him that his mother had no desire to even meet him. So, I decided to lie to him. I tried very hard to locate her, but I couldn't. It has been over 20 years, so no wonder we can't. Let's wait for your turn. I'm sure it will be soon, so let's endure and wait, honey. Contrary to our wish, compatible liver for my husband did not turn up, and while waiting, cancer spread to other organs, and eventually he was given a diagnosis that he had about 6 months to live. After a week, my mother-in-law came to the hospital. Minx. His mother held onto her son and sobbed. My husband did not know anything, and he cried like a child when he saw his mother. I thought it was good that he got to meet with her, even with such circumstances. From that day, his mother came to see her son almost every day to the hospital. When I begged her kneeling in front of her, she never came even once. I wondered why she hadn't come earlier, and I felt resentment toward her. Then, one day, she called me and made a strange proposal. "You're suffering a lot. When you came to see me, I was too shocked and couldn't come earlier due to my situation. As I am also a woman, I'm saying you should just get a divorce on papers only so that you can live more comfortably later. Don't you think?" "Mother, what are you talking about? Why would I divorce Minsock? If you're going to say that again, don't come here anymore." "I'm only saying this for you. You don't know what a shackle it would be to be branded a widow. Think over it." I shouted at my mother-in-law for saying ridiculous things out of the blue. At that time, I couldn't think why she would say that. Then, the hospital said that no further treatment would work and advised spending more time with the family. My husband came home to rest, and the same day he asked me for a divorce. "Let's get a divorce." In his word, I froze. "I heard my mom talking to you. It's out of the blue, but you suffer because of me. I don't want to entrap you even after I die. This is my last wish. Please." My husband refused to imprison me and handed over the divorce papers, and I could no longer refuse his last wish. We got a divorce on papers only, and we planned for our last travel together. My husband said he wanted to complete his bucket list to visit the last of the world's 3 waterfalls. I wanted to show him the Victoria Falls. His doctor was concerned, but in the end, he gave several cautionary warnings and permitted the travel. To us, going to Zambia for 6 nights, 7 days of travel became our last precious memories. After returning from the trip, my husband went to heaven in my arms. When his dad and I were at the funeral, his mother came. "You! How dare you come here? Get out of here!" My father-in-law was unhappy when she was visiting my husband at the hospital. But when she came to the funeral, he yelled at her. "You haven't changed. You always yell. I'm coming to my son's funeral, so what's wrong with that?" "You're the one who hasn't changed. You abandoned your own son for another man. How dare you call him your son with that dirty mouth of yours?" People started to talk, and my mother-in-law seemed a little bewildered. "Are you still singing that tune? You should blame yourself for being such a loser. If you were capable to protect your own family, why would I have done that? Anyway, I have come here, and I'm leaving. When you go over Minsock's inheritance, call me." Inheritance? I started to finally match the puzzles together after listening to her talking about the inheritance. Why should you get anything of Minsock's inheritance? Don't you know? Right now, Minsock is legally single. He has no children, so of course, as a mother, I get 50% of the inheritance. Didn't you know? Everyone was shocked at her, who claimed to be the mother, coveting for her son's inheritance at the funeral, after all these years. Is this why you had my husband divorce me? Pretending you care about my future? Are you a human? When I knelt begging you for the transplant for your son, you said you cut off the ties and didn't even want to meet your son. Now that you learned that my husband has some money, did you get greedy for that? What are you talking about? It's my son. I gave birth through pain. Won't I care about him more than you? Anyway, this is stated in law, so what could you do? She was shameless and claimed her share as the right for being a mother. Law? Okay, let's do it legally. I will never let you touch even a penny of my husband's money. Look at her. I knew you would be like that, so I'm with a lawyer. That woman brought a lawyer to fight it out in the courts, and I could no longer watch that. You're completely mistaken. Your son is a very clever and bright man. Do you think he thoughtlessly asked me for a divorce? He knew what you were up to, so my husband told his dad before we divorced and inherited all his money to him. So, there's no money left for you to take. As soon as I finished talking, that woman frantically looked at her lawyer, who shook his head. When she realized that she has no share of the inheritance, she turned pale and stood dumbfounded. All the guests at the funeral, who had watched the whole scene, started to criticize her. That woman's face flushed, looking uneasy, and immediately left the funeral. When I witnessed such an ugly scene, I felt that just because one gave birth, it didn't mean it gave one the right to be a parent. After my husband's funeral, I returned to Canada. It has been 2 years already since he passed away. People say that time will heal my pain, but when will that be? Especially today, I miss my husband's chatter so much. I dearly wish that he's not sick at where he is and be happy chatting with his friends. Everyone listening to my story, I wish for your health and happiness.